Hey guys, in this video we'll be going through how the registration. So in our previous video we went ahead and we scaffolded all of the identity related pages. We also took a look at the register page where we saw that this view had the form, or this file, which is register.cshtml, was the view which had the form for the email input and the passwords. And then we went on to notice that it also had like a code behind file in the form of a C# file or C# class that allowed us to control the flow of the application. Now we'll be spending some time and understanding exactly what's going on here, and then we'll get a better understanding of how the Razor pages work. So these are called Razor pages, where the C# code is directly attached to the view file. All right, so let's go section by section. So we know the using section is where we include all of our libraries. We open up our namespace, which is our project dot the folder structure coming down to the file. So that's areas dot identity dot pages, and you see that it corresponds dot account, and then our file is inside of the account folder. That's the namespace. We have a class and we call it register model. So by now you should be familiar with, when we say models, we mean view models. We mean classes that are designed specially for the particular view, and the view is designed to interact with the properties being given up or served up directly by the class in question, or the view model in question. And then this particular view model is inheriting from a base class called page model. So page model is built into the ASP.NET Core, and our class in this situation is inheriting from it, which allows it to do certain things that our regular view models probably have not been doing, or we haven't had the need to do, because our functionality is more spread out than in the code behind for the direct view. All right, so then we go ahead and we initialize some of our dependencies, and we already know about dependency injection. So we have dependencies on what we call sign-in manager, user manager. So these two are very key in helping us get some functions to interact with the user database and the user data as we go along. We have the logger. So logger just keeps track of what's happening at what point. And we have the email sender. We move on to our constructor, which initializes each of these dependencies. And then we move on to some properties. So we see here that we have a property called input model, and input model is a class, and its property is input. And then we see it as a data annotation that says bind property. So bind property basically says that if something is listed in the class, or yes, we have the model, right? So if something is listed in the model and we give it the property bind property, it basically gives the view visibility of this property. So in this situation, we're telling the view that it should have visibility of some class called input. And then if we move along, an input is of the type, some object called input, and it's of the class type input model. And we have a return URL, which I'll get into the purpose of eventually. And we have a list of authentication alternatives or external logins. So that's if we configured like LinkedIn and Facebook and all of those, Google, all of those other kind of single sign-on solutions can be integrated, and we can add them to a list, but we won't be getting into that today. So if I move on, you see that the next thing is the implementation or the definition of the input model. So we have input model implemented here, and it's implemented in the form of an object called input, sure, but then the definition of our class input model is right below. So input model is a class, and it has the properties that are being bound to the form. So I'm going to bounce between the form and the model for a bit here. So we see that we have the properties email, password, and confirm password. We see that each of those has annotations that speak to validations that need to be carried out. So we're saying that this is required, the email is required. It is supposed to be an email address, so validate it as such. So you can validate based on data type, and email address is just there. You can just say it's supposed to be an email address. And then we can say the display name is email. So I can easily change this to say email address. I don't want the display name to just be email. So display name, remember, is what gets displayed on the form as the label for the input for whatever property it is being set for or above. Now, if I go back over to my view file and take a look, I'm going to see here that I have the section for the email, and it has the label ASP4 input.email. So remember that in OOP, once we have a model, we can access the public properties by just using the dot operator. So I have input as the model, or we have input model as our class type, and then we have the property that's bound to the form being input. So input is our object of type input model, which means we can say input dot email, input dot password, input dot confirm password, and we can do all of that on the form. So now it is saying that this is the label for the email property inside of our input object, and I also want an input for that same property, and also the validation. And then it does the same thing for password and the same thing for confirm password, which then means if we needed to add more to this form, all of that to say that if we wanted to add more to this form, then we would have to go back to our input model and add additional properties to the form to get more data in there. So I'm just going to go and say that maybe, and I'm going to reference my employees. So remember, we have employee as our data class, and employees in addition to all of these properties here. So just looking back, I'm seeing what else we need. So maybe when somebody registers, I want them to provide at least their date of birth. All right, let me not use date of birth. Let's use their tax ID. All right, so when you're registering, you must put in your email address, put in a tax ID, and a password. All right. Or, you know what, let's use first name, last name, since that's common enough. So we want the first name and last name of somebody who is signing up when they're at the point of registration, right? So just using that example, I'm going to go back to register.cshtml.cs, and then I'm going to add those two properties to the input model. So I'm going to say required, because I require that you put in your first name. And I'm going to say that the data type expected here, I'm not sure if data type string is going to be that strict considering that. So I can say data type dot, and then it would list out the type of data types that it is supporting. And these are all enums. So you see it has quite a few enums for the data type that it will allow. But I think, okay, there's text. So I can just say text to specify that, you know, text should be what goes into this field when it's validating it. And then I can set up a display name. So I'll say display, and name is equal to, and this one will be first name. All right, so that's my first one. And so those are the validation or the data annotations that will govern the validation, but then I need the property itself. So I'll say prop string, and then this is first name. Type that wrongly. Let me just fix that quickly. So string tab first name, press enter. And so we've added first name, and I'll just copy all of this because it's going to be very similar for the last name. All I change is the display name to last and the property name also to last name. So now I just added two fields to the model. So as far as the CSHTML or the view knows, it can support two additional fields. So now I need to actually write code to add them to the form. So I'm just going to push down email. So I'm going to take this entire block, that is this entire div form group for email. I'm going to copy it, and then I'm just going to add it twice right above. But then the first one is going to be input dot first name, and the input is for input dot first name, and everything in this whole form group is relative to first name. And then the second one is going to be for last name. So everything here is relative to last name. And now you see that your registration form just got a bit bigger. Now you have fields for first name, last name, and email, password, and you need to confirm the password. If you needed to put in username, you could put in username. If you wanted to put in other things, you could put in other things. I'll show you later on why the email address ends up as the username. But the point is, if you didn't want that and you wanted them to specify a username, then you could actually just add the property with the required validation, or the, whatever is preferred as the validation for that field, and then make sure that it is represented inside of the form. I'm also going to change this from btn-primary to btn-block. Just, minor changes. But at the end of the day, you can do whatever. And then if you look further down in the form, you see the section where they are allowing you to register with another service. So because this list that I showed you earlier inside of our underlying model, there it is, there's nothing in that list. Nothing goes into that list. And so there's a little if statement that is being run, which is saying that if the list is empty, then show this message. If the list is not empty, then produce a button per entry in that list, right? So you can contextually print or not print HTML or whatever based on different conditions using simple if else, using, very C# looking code. All right, so I'm going to save those changes. So I can just do Control Shift and S to save all changes. Actually, I feel better doing a build. So I'm going to do Control Shift and B. So I'm holding down Control and Shift and just pressing B and doing a build. Now, after a successful build, we are sure we have no errors, and I'm just going to put a breakpoint inside of our model class here. So I'm going to scroll down to one of these functions, and then I'm going to put a breakpoint on the get function, and I'm going to put a breakpoint on the onPost. So we have onGet, and we have a keyword there, async, and we have onPost async. So I'm just going to put those breakpoints there and then go into debug mode, and then let's see exactly what happens each step of the way. All right, so now we're in debug mode. Let's try to register a user. So I'm going to click register, and then it's going to pause, and then Visual Studio is going to light up saying that, oh, you hit a breakpoint. So you see when I click register, what it's doing is loading, it's calling this function, which is just saying, set a return URL and set up the external logins list. So that list gets initialized here, and it gets it from some service that would know if we had configured any external login lists or not, which we haven't. So this is empty, but the return URL is basically like if you're, let's say you are on Amazon.com and you were on the products page, but then you said, oh, you want to log in, or you want to register, sorry. So you click register. While you're on the products page, you fill out the form and you're registered, and they automatically log you in, but they return you to the products page. That's the purpose of return URL. So the return URL gets set contextually based on, where it is, which page you are registering from. And then they will say, oh, this is the page he was on when you registered. The reason it says equals null is it's just saying that if no value is provided, then make it null. That's all it's saying. So if no value was provided inside of this variable, then its default value should be null. So as it stands, we're getting a null return value, return URL, and an empty list of external logins, but it knows it's going to the view, so it's not returning a view or anything, because that's code that is running behind the view anyway. Now, when we look at our screen, we're seeing, okay, we have the first name, the last name, the email address, the password, and the confirm password. And we see to the side here where they're saying that, okay, remember that if statement, if there were no external login services, then display that message that no whatever that is being displayed there also. So now I can go ahead and fill out this form. So I'm going to say test user, that's first name, last name, and I'm going to say test@email.com. Now the email doesn't have to be legit, because, well, it's not going to send an email anyway. And then the password, I'm going to use the same password, P @SSWORD1, and I'm going to reuse that. And then I'm going to register. Now, firstly, I'm going to make an error in the password and confirm password. And I click register. It's validating and saying the password confirmation, the password and the confirmation don't match. And if you look back at our model, you'd see that that was the message that was being sent. So they actually have a compare data annotation where they say, okay, I'm just comparing whatever value is going into this with the value that is going into whichever other property, which in this case is password. So we have a property password, and then the data annotation says compare password, which is that property, with this property, and then the error message should be the password and confirmation password do not match. So right there, it's not even submitting to the post and knowing if it's valid or not. It's just telling me they don't match. All right. And so I'm going to go ahead and retype it in a way that it matches. So P @SSWORD1. And in the same way, if I did not put in the first name value, it's telling me it's required because I did specify the data annotation that said required. So everything in the form is required. And so when filling out the form, it will prompt you basically at the same time. So unlike with the controllers where it has to go to the post action and then check if it's valid, then return with a message, it's like it's loading the entire model and consuming it and letting you know on the fly that, hey, you're in violation of what the model says the values are allowed to be. So first name, last name, email address, password, everything is in order. I click register. And then we hit the next breakpoint. So our next breakpoint here is in the post. And we're seeing here that, well, we'll step through and look at what each line does. So, well, the return URL is just being set based on what is being passed in. So it's saying if it's not empty, then I want the value. If it is empty, then just send them back to the home page. Pretty much that's all it's saying. The external logins, we know that these are already empty, so I'm going to just set another breakpoint. And a cool thing is that one, you can use F11 to go line by line, but I really don't need to go to these two lines because they have no value to me. So I can set another breakpoint somewhere else, and then I can just press F5 and it will continue to the next breakpoint. So that yellow arrow shows you which breakpoint or which line it's at. So I'll just remove those two. And now we're at this breakpoint. You can also hover on the line and actually click this icon, and then it just runs the execution to that exact line anyway. So you have multiple options of debugging or just tracking your code as you go along. Now I'm going to hover over model state. It does do the check, and I'm just going to do an F11, and it says it's valid. So it moves down into the, oh, here it is. So model state is valid, it's evaluates true. Then what it does, it says, give me a var user. So var user, that's a new variable or a new object. So var is a very vague keyword that you can use to say, I want a variable, I don't know what data type it might be, so just give me a variable, and it will assume its type based on what's assigned. So if I said var num and said equal 1, then it knows it's an int. If I said var num is equal to open quotation marks and put in a sentence, then num is now a string. So that's the power of the var keyword. When you're not sure what data type you're expecting, you can just say var and a variable name, and then it will assume that object type afterwards. So I'm saying here that var user is equal to a new identity user, and we're passing in the username. And this is how the username value ends up being the email address, because it's passing in the username as input.email and the email as input.email. Now, there is no field for the username. If you had put in a field for the username, then you just say username is equal to input dot whatever field name you chose. Email is equal to input.email unless you change that property name. Notice that it's creating the user with only those two properties, but we had added other properties in the form of first name and last name. So we need to modify our code to make sure that when we create the identity user, it knows the username, email, first name, and last name. After doing all of that, it passes in the password. So it creates another variable called result. And then it says user manager dot create async. So it passes in that user object that we just created via identity, the identity user. It passes in that object as well as whatever password we just entered. This function pretty much will take care of the hashing of the password and the insertion into the database and all of those wonderful things. And then it says if result.succeeded, meaning did we successfully create this user in the database, then log that it was created. So log, yeah, it was created, good. And then generate the code. So remember that right now we're doing some email confirmation stuff. So we're going to generate that code. And then it does that fanciness where it generates all of that code and then it sends you to the confirm email page. So this is a redirect to the confirm page. And then it goes on to invoke the email sender service, which we have not configured, and send off that email to whatever email address was provided with the text, confirm your email, please confirm your identity, by clicking the link in the body of the email that we're sending. So you see it's sending an anchor tag with a link to whatever code it just generated as the confirmation code in this block of code here, in this code block up here, sorry. All right. Now, after it does all of that, it checks, does it really require confirm account? And if it does, then redirect to the page. So this is actually an option we can turn off. So I'm going to show you how to turn it off, but I'm still going to configure the email sender. So we can check we can turn it off. So it's checking, is it turned on or off? If it is turned on, then we want to redirect to this page, which is another identity page that we got in the scaffolding with that email address. And then otherwise, we just want to go ahead and log in the person. So that's what that block of code, the sign-in manager, has to do with your sign-in session. So if you're logging in, logging out, that sign-in manager dot this function, log in this user and say is persistent, is false. And then we redirect to wherever you were coming from if there was any link at all assigned there. If there are errors, then we specify the errors that are being generated. And at the end of all of that, we return page. Now, that was a mouthful. And I mean, the code is pretty straightforward. It's straightforward. If you just follow the sequence, you can kind of deduce, you just pay attention to the names of the objects and the names of the functions. You can kind of deduce what is happening at each stage, because create async and you see user. I'm sure you can figure out that this is creating the user with the password, right? And then it's checking, did that succeed? Was that successful? And then it does whatever it's supposed to do as it goes along, right? So I'm going to go ahead and continue. So I actually just mistakenly, but I clicked the play button at that line. So if I just click this play button, you see it just jumps to that line. It just executes as it goes along. So everything that is supposed to be done gets done. And if you just want to see what happens at a particular line, it will just move along. But then at the end of this, it's now finished. It's no longer pausing for me to debug. And then you see that we redirect to this page where it's saying click here to confirm your account. I'm just going to confirm. And then it says, thank you for confirming your email. So that's that next page it moves on to once that's confirmed. And then I'm going to come out of debug mode. And then we're going to look at the database, and I'm just going to right click the table and say view data. And then we'll see that I had it open already. So if you already have it open, you can just click this refresh button up here, and then it will rerun that select query and redisplay the data that is there. And we see here now that we have two users. We have test that we just created, and we have Lone Crusader. And notice that we still have no first name or last name for anybody. So I'm going to modify the code so that we're sure that the additional fields actually get pushed to the database. Before I do that though, I'm going to delete test user. I just created it. I'm just going to delete it so I can reuse that email address. And built-in is also validation that you can't reuse an email address or username. Well, yeah, an email address or username if it already exists. So all of those validations are already built in. So now I'm going to go back to my my register.cshtml.cs file, and then I'm going to modify our creation of the identity user. So our creation of the identity user says username, email, and now I want to say comma. And when I say comma, I'm seeing all of the other potential fields that are coming from the database also. But then notice, identity user doesn't have the additional fields that I created when I put in the employee. So when I'm looking at the additional fields that are there, these are all the default ones. I'm not seeing first name, not seeing last name, and I can just bring back the employee data class where I extended identity user and added these fields to identity user, but really I added them to the table, but not to the class identity user. So in creating a new identity user, it doesn't really know about these because these are part of employee. So what I'm going to do then is instead of creating a new identity user, I'm going to create a new employee. And then, of course, I'm going to have to bring over the inclusion. So I have to run that and include the file. And now I'm saying new employee and username, email. Notice no red lines because employee does know about the identity user fields, username and email. And when I press comma and I use control space just to see the list, then I'm going to notice that I'm seeing all of the identity user fields in addition to my additional fields for employee. So I'm going to say also first name is equal to input dot first name. And then I'm going to say last name is equal to input dot last name. All right, and I'm just going to break the line so that I don't have it going off screen too much. All right, so let's format the code a bit. So now I have a new employee being created, and remember, employee extends identity user. So as far as anything that requires identity user is concerned, employee looks just like identity user. So I'm creating a new employee and then I'm passing it up into the async create. And if you look in the, if you just hover over create async and then look at what it requires, you see that it requires identity user. I'm passing in employee. Once again, it's extending identity user. So as far as create async is concerned, it's getting an object that looks enough like identity user. It has no problem. Now I'm going to remove my breakpoints. And since we now understand what's happening in this post async function, I'm going to do another registration. So I'm just going to save all changes. And then I'm going to do another registration and then we'll see the full picture. Now, this time I'm not going to go into debug mode. Like I said before, what I'm going to do is use browser links. So this refresh arrow beside the start button, I'm just going to click that down arrow. And firstly, you need to enable browser link if you haven't already done so. I'm going to click browser link dashboard, which brings up this dashboard to the left. Well, to my right, it may bring it up somewhere else on your screen, but then I'm going to say view in browser. Now, when you do that, it's actually going to launch a quick version of IIS called IIS Express, which is kind of built into Visual Studio, but then it will actually host a staging of your website without you being in debug mode. Now, once again, if you're in this mode, if you make any adjustment, well, you can't track your changes the way you can when you're in debug mode. You can't set breakpoints. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and register, and I'm going to reuse the same test user and email address. And this time I'm just going to use a random email address. And then the password is the same password, P@SSWORD1. And I'm just using one password because I don't want to have too many passwords and not remember, which is which. So Now I say first name, last name, email address. So now I'm adding the additional ones, and the expectation is that when I click register and I'm registered, when I look in the database, I should see a user record with a first name and a last name. So when I click register, it goes on to the confirm registration, and yes, we know all of that. We click here to register, and then we can now go and verify in the database. So I'm going to bring back Visual Studio, still not in debug mode, but I'm going to go over to my Object Explorer and look in my table. I think I already have it open. Yes, I do. And then when I click refresh, then it will show me the record for the newly created user, which is test user, and the first name, last name do have values. So for anything that we wanted to enter, we could just, modify our registration code and make sure that we're accounting for it. You'll also notice that in discriminator, it's saying employee versus identity user. So discriminator is actually tracking which class or base class is being used to create this user record. So it knows that identity user is the class in this situation because that was the default one, but then we modified it and now we're creating employee, or creating records using the employee class instead of. So that means you can actually have different classes per user type, and you can easily discriminate which is which based on the discriminator. But this is more of a class level. This is not really like for roles or anything like that. It's just saying, oh yeah, this base class was used for this record, and so maybe it's easier for you to manage and query. Now for the registration requirement, or the requirement that at the end of a registration we send an email, I am going to disable that feature by going to the startup.cs. So it came enabled for me. I'm not sure if it's enabled for you. If it's not, then that's fine. But if it is for you and you want to disable it, then we can just say that we are removing this line. So when we're setting up the default identity, say services.add default identity user, and you can change this, but you don't have to, and I won't, but we could change this to employee or any other abstract class, but I leave the defaults to the defaults, right? But then for the options, I don't want these options. You can add many other options. You can just say comma, say options dot, and then they will kind of show you the other options that are available to you. Sorry. Well, actually, I would have to refactor the code. Sorry. So you could have multiple options. You just start up the lambda options expression, and then you would open quotation, brace. Brace is open and close. And then with each option, you close with a semicolon, and then you say options, and then you say dot. And then you would be able to see the other options that you can. So you can specify password strength from here, if you want to require uppercase, require lowercase, require unique characters, or you just want it to be simple. You could enforce that from this level. You could set default timeout or lockout number of attempts. You could limit so many things from this point, or enable so many things from this point. So one of the things that is enabled is the option to have the require confirmed account is true. That means require that they confirm the account through the email. I'm just going to disable that. We've done quite a bit of work, and so I'm going to disable that, and we won't be configuring that email service, at least not now. So now when somebody registers, they don't need to confirm their email address again. And so we probably have to go back to our register and change something to reflect that change. So we have here that the person is registered, and then we have that we're sending the email. So if we disable the need for the email, then we actually don't need any of this code. As a matter of fact, the only code that needs to happen after the person has successfully logged in is the fact that we're going to sign them in and then redirect them. Because everything above that, well, apart from on the logger, or the logger line, but everything under logger is geared towards sending that email, redirecting them to the page, having them click something to confirm. All of that goes away if we're just allowing the person to register. So I'm going to take out that entire block of code, and I'm just going to take out this stray brace. And what's going to happen is that when somebody has successfully registered, they will simply get signed in and then return to their whatever page they were on. And you see that now that registration block of code looks much simpler. So I'm going to test this out and I'm going to register again. All right, so I'm in the process of filling out this form, and I actually attempted to use the same email address and it's telling me that it's already taken. So once again, that validation is there for like the username, and well, this is on username, not necessarily on the email, but I'll leave that for later. So I'll say test@test.com, and we use the same p@ssword1, p@ssword1. And then we click register, and then we observe that we go straight to a logged in state. So it redirects to the home page, and we are now logged in. So there was no need for registration and confirmation. We just register and then we're logged in. So that's how we can go about simplifying or customizing our registration experience. Everybody's going to want a different experience for their users.